There's lots and lots of different units you might use in CSS. Here we're going to cover common ones that you will use and see when you're writing CSS. We've already seen pixels. Screens are displayed in pixels, so this unit makes sense in that 1 pixel in CSS represents 1 pixel on a screen. 1 pixel is pretty small. Let's change this border to 1 pixel. If I make it 10 pixels, it will be thicker. Pixels are a good all-round unit, and you can use any numeric value here. For instance, it could be 900 pixels, but that's much too thick. The problem with pixels elsewhere is that they're absolute units. So if I set the article to be 400 pixels wide, although it fits on my screen, all the screens out there are different sizes, and it might not fit on your user's screen. It might be that they're using a small phone, or conversely, a big TV. So this isn't a good unit for using when setting the size of the elements on your page. A better unit for size of elements is percentage, which we set to the number and the percentage sign. This has set our article to be 50% of the width of its parent. So when I change the size of the browser, it changes the width of the screen. This is a relative unit and useful because screen sizes do vary. Percentages do take into account the parent element though, so they're not always that useful. We might want a unit that's relative to the whole screen size. For that we have viewport units. We write them with a V, and then if we want the width it's a W, and if we want a height it's an H. One of these is 1% of the width or the height, depending on which one we are using. So for this article, we could have 90 VW, which is 90 viewport widths. Again, this changes with the size of the screen because it's relative to the size of the browser that we're looking at. I could use viewport height here as well. Just because I'm setting the width doesn't mean that I actually have to use the viewport widths. It's the same as percentage in that it's relative and it resizes with the screen. However, because it's not affected by the parent, it can be more substantial. As well as viewport height and viewport width, there's viewport max and viewport min. You write them with V max and V min. They're equivalent to which one's bigger, whether the viewport height or the viewport width is bigger. So in our case, because the height is bigger than the width of the screen, viewport max is equivalent to 1 VH. So if I set the width to 60 VH, this is the same as 60 Vmax. However, if the screen was wider than it was taller, 1 Vmax would be 1 VW. Vmin is the smaller measurement, and in our case, that's VW. So 60 VW is the same as Vmin. However, if I changed my browser so it was wider than it is taller, then Vmin would be the same as VH. There are some measurements which are specific to fonts, even though they're units, and we can use them wherever we want. The most common are EM and REM. It's best to illustrate the difference between these two with an example. If I set the font size on the body to be 1.2 EM or M, it will set the font size to everything within the body. And then if I set the font size on the article as well, using the EM unit, what is in fact happening is it's looking at the font size of the body and multiplying it by the font size that I have set. It looks at the font size of the parent element. So if I was to do it again for the link, even though I'm setting the font size to be the same, it's multiplying it by the font size of the parent. So here, the link is actually bigger than the article. It works this way because of how designers work with fonts and the ratios that they use to dictate their font sizes throughout a design. However, it can be difficult with CSS because it can cause erratic behavior with your elements. So in this case, we can use REM or REM. REM is the root EM and only takes the value to be multiplied by from the root element, which is the toppermost element in our HTML. Now that I've changed it to REM, you can see how it's normalized all of our font sizes in our page. This can be much more stable than working with the M unit. These are the most common sizing units that we have, and we can use them anywhere that we need a unit value within CSS. So the margin here, I could use REM for that. There's a whole list of other sizing units, like millimeters or inches, which you might find useful if you are printing. You can find a link to a list of them in the resources.